You are wrong about
Boba Fett, where?
Oh yes, I defended the midichlorians, and now I'm standing one of the most contentious aspects of the original trilogy. Whatever will I White Knight next? Hint. But Thanuk, you got us on the midichlorians, but you've got no references for Boba. He didn't do anything. He just stood around and looked cool. Oh no, my friends, for you see, although Boba did not get any special action set pieces like Vader or the Emperor or his dear old dad, that doesn't mean he did nothing. In fact, if we look at his impact on the story, Boba Fett might actually be one of the most important characters in the original trilogy. Let me explain. Boba's time in the limelight might have been brief, but if you look at the ripple effect from his presence, he is a gigantic mover and shaker, baby. Boba is first introduced to us amongst a group of bounty hunters hired by the Empire to capture Han Solo. And if this was the beginning and end of his tenure in the original trilogy, I would understand the complaints, kind of like the idolization of IG-88 from people who haven't read the comics, books, or played any of the games. He's even singled out by Vader specifically.
No disintegration.
Suggesting the two have a history and implying him to be the deadliest bounty hunter of the group. Now, what I'm saying right now might not come as a shock to any of you, and indeed it might simply be reinforcing what you already believe. A belief I'm about to shatter in 3, 2... Unlike all the other bounty hunters the Empire had on their payroll, it was only Boba who was able to outwit Han Solo and track him to Bespin, an action that allowed the Empire to ambush them, to take Han Solo and company hostage, and eventually freeze him in carbonite. If this was his only contribution to the plot, I'd say he's already leaps and bounds ahead of other small-time characters I could mention.
We relate to her due to her actions and her character.
N2187. Not anymore. The name's Finn, and I'm in charge. I'm in charge now, Phasma.
And that, I think, is truly modern.
But he's not done. Luke senses a disturbance in the Force and flies to Cloud City to save his friends. If you rewatch the scene, he actually gets very close to freeing them as well. All he needs to do is get the drop on these troopers and... Boba manages to delay Luke by at least 30 seconds, keeping him pinned down so his friends can be dragged just out of reach, giving Vader just the window he needs to spring his trap. You see, Luke's entire showdown with Vader not only relies on Boba being present, but Boba being a threat, meaning that Luke's amputation and the plot's ultimate revelation...
No. I am your father.
All thanks to Boba. Now, ensuring one of the greatest plot twists in film history is allowed to occur ain't bad for a day's work, but my main man isn't finished yet. He's not out of the game until he wins, and that's exactly what happens. Think about this for a second. Vader wins the battle against Luke, but ultimately loses his prize. Boba, meanwhile, while being far less action-centric, got exactly what he came for. Boba captures Han Solo and delivers him to Jabba. You could argue this is the Empire's victory, but no. It was Boba that tracked them to Cloud City. It was Boba who ensured that they couldn't rescue Han in time. And it was Boba who was ultimately responsible for Han's capture in the cliffhanger of Empire Strikes Back. All the Empire did was freeze him. Empire Strikes Back is a film where the villain ultimately wins, but that villain wasn't Vader. Luke ultimately slipped through his grasp, even if it was at great cost, but Boba? There's no ambiguity, he won. He was the winner of Empire Strikes Back and the ultimate facilitator of its most important scenes. Boba Fett ultimately enabled the rest of the story to occur the way it did, and his victory cements him as one of the most successful villains in the 6 Star Wars films, perhaps just behind Palpatine. Sure, his writing went to shit in Return of the Jedi, but his impact was already solidified. Can you imagine how different the films would be if the Empire didn't make it to Bespin? Had Lando just fixed the Falcon? Had Han been around to continue helping the rebellion? Had Luke continued his training through to completion with no knowledge of his true origins? Nothing would be the same without him. There's a reason he's so beloved. Do not confuse doing little with achieving little, because his impact was huge. And now for a bonus tangent. You are wrong about knee rockets. So, episode 6 of Mando was, pretty shit, eh? What was far less shit, though, was Boba himself, who I thought was really cool, despite the obvious dad bod he's now rocking. There is one point of contention here, though, and that is the knee rockets. These things are more than a little bit hilarious to a lot of people who are chalking it up to yet another Disney Star Wars interpretation of a classic character. Except this isn't the case at all. Boba has had knee rockets since Empire.
They had little knee pads where I could fire darts with.
And honestly, I don't think they're that silly, at least in concept. No, the problem here is their presentation here as a primary weapon that Boba utilizes in combat, which is clearly done to show how cool he is rather than respecting what I can only assume the original purpose of the weapons probably were. Knee rockets are not going to be your go-to weapon in any combat scenario where you're as decked out as Boba is in this scene. I mean, look at him here. He has to stop and pose like William T. Riker asserting his dominance over every piece of furniture he sees. My God, that was a man. Anyway, if the stormtroopers were actually shooting at him, he'd be incredibly vulnerable in that position, so why have them at all? Well, let's move away from combat and imagine a scenario where you're captured and your hands are bound. It would be useful to have a set of weapons in plain sight where no one would think to look. Thus, knee rockets. Honestly, they've still got Boba on for the rest of this season, so they should have just waited until they had a scene where he got captured, and that's when the knee rockets get to shine. So yeah, the knee rockets aren't stupid, but the way they were utilized certainly was. That being said, I still really appreciate their usage as a hardcore fan. I can't help it, I just love little details like that. I just wish that same attention to detail would go into the episodes themselves. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw here, you'll probably also enjoy my other video, You Are Wrong About Midichlorians, where I debunk one of the most commonly held misconceptions about the prequels. I'm also working on a huge 3-part series where I will be critiquing The Rise of Skywalker. It will be by far the largest project I've worked on to date, and these smaller videos have really helped to improve my editing style and general workflow. If you liked this video, the Tross video is going to be this times 100, both in terms of length and in terms of quality. Currently, I'm just fixing up the script as I lost a lot of progress a few months ago, but I've almost recovered everything that was added in the meantime, so everything else after that will just be redrafting to get the script to the most polished state it can be. If you want to see videos like this come out faster, feel free to leave a one-time donation on Ko-fi. Every little bit does help, and I hope to continue to bring you quality content as I'm able. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.